It's not just one memory of my granny that I remember best, but 28 years of me pushing my face into the cashmere of her sweater, smelling mothballs mixed with Chanel No. 5, putting my arms around her giant middle, and feeling the rumble in my whole body when she would talk, or when she would laugh, or when she would sing. Выходила на берег Катюша, на высокий берег на крутой. And as soft and as warm and as kind as my granny could be, she could be cold and hard and terrifying if you did something wrong. I remember times when I was a teenager coming into the house and being walked backwards by her as she hit me on either side of my arm, saying, "Marsha, I told you to come back before it was dark. I will hit you with my belt." She never actually did hit me or my brother with her belt, but we would try and behave, which was quite hard with her sometimes. So she was very strict, and she was also very eccentric. So there was one time she rang my mum. We moved eventually like 10 doors down from her, and she rang my mum once at 2 a.m. and said, "Where is Marsha?" And my mum's like, "She's at home. She's been at home for hours." I was 15. And she said, "I understand that Marsha is pregnant." And my mum was like, "And your evidence is?" And she got very serious and said, "Marsha was doing homework in same room as her boyfriend was mending bicycle." And then when my grandpa died, she started to dissolve quite quickly into senile dementia. And I don't think it was through grief. I think it was just like suddenly for the first time in her life, she didn't have to have it together anymore. So she just like let go. And I know that senile dementia can be really sad if someone's in a home and it's really confusing for them. We were lucky. We were able to keep my granny at home. We had like a succession of Russian illegal immigrants who needed jobs, and we were happy to give them one because they could speak to her. My granny spoke 4 different languages, but to the end mostly spoke like a mishmash of the 4, but the Russian was the easiest for her to understand. And I think with senile dementia, it's a bit like being with a 2-year-old where their immediate reality is their only reality. So if everybody's standing around and wringing their hands and going, "Oh, this is terrible," then they're like, "Things are really bad." Whereas if you're doing what my family did, where one person will be like, "Quick, Granny's trying to eat the entire block of butter like an ice cream." And we all come running and point at her and start laughing. Then she's like, "Well, something is hilarious. It seems to be me. This is going brilliantly." And she was so funny. She went through this amazing period where she would blend fiction and reality. So I'd be watching like Jerry Springer with her, and she'd start telling me his entire back history, which she was like simultaneously making up on the spot and fully convinced by, where she's like, "Marsha, what you must understand is this man is originally from Russia. The girls in the village were in love with him, but he moved to America when he was a little boy, which is why you cannot hear a trace of accent." And then one time, she and I were watching Diagnosis Murder with Dick Van Dyke, which I assume from The Grown some of you have seen. It was a daytime TV show. There was always a murder. And my granny was asking me a lot of very intense questions about the murder, which I could have only answered if I had been on the squad. But, you know, I tried to give her what I could, and then she needed to go to the loo, and she wasn't very mobile, and so we had a commode, like one of those kind of old-fashioned big chairs that has a big kind of wooden flap that you lift up, and then there's a potty underneath. And so I put her on the pot, and she did a poo, and, you know, afterwards I wiped her up, and it's kind of gross, but you do it for love. And after I had cleaned her up and pulled up her underwear and sat her back down again, I went to take the potty away, and she put one hand on my arm. She had tiny little hands, one tiny hand, and she pointed at the potty and said, "Marsha, make sure that you do not remove this, because they will need to examine it for evidence." And then she started to really slow down. And she stopped taking pleasure in food. She stopped taking pleasure in the cat. We had this black and white cat called Mimi, who she absolutely loved, and she would call it by the name of, the cat six cats previous. That she'd come in and she'd go, "Poshok, come here!" And she would just jump on her knee. But she stopped caring about the cats. And I would come in sometimes and kiss her and be like, "Granny, Granny, Granny." And at best, she'd just kind of gormlessly look up at me. So when I got the phone call from my mum saying, "The doctor's been, he says maybe she'll last another couple of days, but that's probably it." What surprised me was how surprised I was. I remember standing on the platform at London Bridge Station and feeling like the ground was falling away from me. Because this wasn't just the little Mrs. Tiggywinkle granny of the last couple of years, this was all my grannies. This was the granny whose knee I sat on when I was 4, and the one who told me off when I was 14, and the one I laughed at TV with when I was 24. So I got home, and just after I arrived, the Russian priests arrived. So I don't know if you've ever seen Russian Orthodox priests before. They have these kind of tall black pillar box hats, long white beards, long black robes. Mimi the cat, who was terrified of everyone except for my granny, immediately ran up and started rubbing herself against their legs, because I think she recognized one of her own. So they came in and they did the last rites in Russian, and we prayed and we cried. And then that night, my mum and my Uncle Andrew and I all put our mattresses down on the floor of my granny's bedroom to sleep there. Except I couldn't sleep, because I kept thinking, what if she dies and we're not there? And I knew it didn't really matter in the scheme of things, but we had been there holding my grandpa's hand when he died. We'd been there holding my Uncle Boris's hand when he died. And I didn't want her to have to do that by herself. So I got up and I went and climbed into the bed behind her. Put one hand on her shoulder, which was bony and trembling. The other one, I put my arm around her and she gripped my hand with her little one. And we slept like that for a couple of hours. And then I woke up, and then my mum woke up, and then she woke up. And we went to give her some water, and the only way we could do that was to dip a sponge into some water and then hold it to her lips. And she hadn't said anything for weeks, and she hadn't said anything that made any sense for months. But she said, "Spasiba," which means thank you. And then she said, "Daragaya," which means my beloved. And then she did something she hadn't done for years. And lying in the bed in her throaty little voice, and my mum and I laughed, snotty crying tears. So we woke up the next day and we managed to get in touch with my brother who lives in Thailand. And he said, this was Thursday, and he said, "I can't make it back until Tuesday." And we said, "Well, you'll be back for the funeral, we're here with her." But Thursday night came and went, and then Friday came and went, and she was still there, and Saturday came and went, and she was unconscious the whole time or asleep, like she didn't seem to be in pain. And for the rest of us, it kind of felt a bit like Christmas, because we didn't get dressed most days. We just sit around in our pajamas. People would come over and we'd have long lunches. My friends would all bring me presents. One friend brought a pair of Winnie the Pooh socks. Another friend, I'm a massive fan of the TV show Red Dwarf, and she had been at work and had met one of the cast of Red Dwarf. And usually she's like, "I'm a professional, I will not." But she went up to him and got him to write an autograph. So I still have from Craig Charles. It says, "Dear Marsha, kisses, be strong." And then Sunday came and went, and Monday came and went. And then on Tuesday morning, my brother arrived at 10:30. And my granny hadn't recognized any of us for a really long time. She hadn't recognized that anyone was in the room, even. But at 11:15, my mum called my brother and I into the room. So I don't know if you've ever been there when someone is dying. I am lucky enough, and I do feel lucky to have been there 3 times. And part of the reason you know it's the end is they have this very particular kind of breathing. So my mum and I are holding one of her little hands. My uncle and my brother are holding the other one. And my uncle is praying to her. And he's English, but he's praying in Russian because it's the language that she understands the best and it's the softest language she speaks. Отче наш, еже еси на небесах. And my mum and I look at each other, and we cry and we smile and we nod, and we call my uncle out of his prayer. And then suddenly, it was one of the funniest moments of my entire life. But about 30 seconds after that, she stopped for good, and that was how my granny had the best death she could have had. Thank you.